أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم आवाज़ आ रही है ये फ़ोनोग्राफ से ढूंढो खुदा को दिल से ना लाफ़ो गुज़ाफ से जब तक अमल नहीं है दिल पाक व साफ से कमतर नहीं ये मशगला बुत के तवाफ़ से. This voice is coming from the phonograph. Seek God from the heart, not through boasting and bragging. If deeds are not there with a pure and cleansed heart, this pastime, meaning the phonograph, is no better than circuits around an idol. These words were written by the promised Messiah ﷺ after the phonograph arrived in Qadian. This message is poetic, but is also prophetic and carries a warning. The promised Messiah ﷺ is saying it is as if technology, as if the phonograph is telling us, seek God. Don't fall in love with me instead of my Creator. Technology has evolved, but human nature has not. Whether the Stone Age or the digital age, man seems to always fall into idol worship, whether statues and stones or phonographs and phones. The topic of my speech is the best of both worlds, mastering technology to stay connected socially and spiritually. Until recently, technology evolved at a very gradual pace. Now, in the last century, we saw a sudden jump in the number of inventions. The pace of life has changed completely. There are more inventions in the last century than in the previous 20 centuries combined. So why this sudden jump from linear growth in inventions to an exponential growth in inventions? The promised Messiah ﷺ explains. He says, quote, "It is a matter of principle that whenever a messenger appears in the world, all great world events and revolutions that take place in his time are attributed to his advent." He's saying all these devices are to enable him to fulfill his message and his mission for which God sent him. The same God who sent him also sent us the internet, social media, telephones, and airplanes. Just as Allah Ta'ala was preparing the promised Messiah ﷺ, so was he also preparing Thomas Edison and all the prolific inventors of that era. The Holy Quran is filled with prophecies about the coming of the promised Messiah ﷺ and his age. And one of them is mentioned in Surah Takvir, that man will be brought together. The promised Messiah ﷺ said that bringing together, his commentary on this verse refers to, quote, print, paper, post, telegraph, railroads, and steamboats, making the world, he says, one city. We speak of a global village. The Prophet Messiah ﷺ 120 years ago was speaking of one city, one global city. And these are all, he says, new instruments for tabligh. The telephone, the light bulb, the car, the video camera, all these are just some of the inventions of that time which came about during the lifetime of the promised Messiah ﷺ. The biggest company in the world at that time was AT&T, a company many of you are familiar with. Perhaps you use AT&T. So many of the big tech companies that we use today, Sprint, Nokia, Ericsson, our cell phone makers, IBM, our computer makers, General Electric, Kodak, Nintendo, all of these came and emerged in those late 1880s, and 1890s. I say this and share this just to tell you that this was a new wave, and Allah was preparing the world in haste for bringing about a great change to come. The Holy Prophet ﷺ had two missions, Takmil Hidayat and Takmil Ishad. That is completion of guidance, which is the Quran and Sunnah, and completion of spreading that guidance. He said that the second of these two will be done during the time of the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, our time today. Thomas Edison, considered the father of today's smartphone, invented a revolutionary device. It recorded and replayed sound. And for our children who are not familiar with what a phonograph is, it is basically an audio recorder that also replays sound. They called it a talking machine. And it astonished people because the world had never seen anything like this before. And it is a forefather of modern technology. Even this microphone is a kind of child of the phonograph. It really marked a turning point in our history. One of the companions of the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, Hazrat Nawab Muhammad Ali Khan, raziyallahu ta'ala anhu, he bought the phonograph. And the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, told him to bring it to Qadian. The promised Messiah was so enthusiastic, as soon as it arrived, he went into a room and composed a poem within minutes. And he told Hazrat Maulvi Abdul Kareem raziyallahu ta'ala anhu to recite it on the phonograph. And I'll repeat those words that I opened with again, and this time listen closely. This voice is coming from the phonograph. Seek God from thy heart, not through boasting and bragging. If deeds are not there with a pure and cleansed heart, this pastime, meaning the phonograph or modern day technology, is no better than circuits around an idol. Later, he also asked Hazrat Maulvi Hakim Nuruddin raziyallahu ta'ala anhu to record his commentary of a few verses of the Holy Quran on it. This was the purpose of technology that the promised Messiah alayhi salam demonstrated for us, to become like Abdul Kareem's and Nuruddin's. The promised Messiah alayhi salam also permitted the use of the camera to take a picture of himself. Photographs were considered taboo at that time. There were Muslims who were saying that photography is un-Islamic, that it is haram. But the promised Messiah alayhi salam corrected this notion and utilized this technology. He hired printing presses, he used phonographs, he used photography, and these were the cutting-edge technologies of his time. The promised Messiah alayhi salam had it, he used it, he showed us how to use it and what to use it for. The attraction is so intense sometimes. Just look around when you're driving and it seems as though almost everybody is driving and also looking at their phones. More than 1/4 of all car accidents are due to cell phones. Break times for texting and driving are worse than drunk driving. We'd rather take people's lives and ruin our own than give up this habit. Anytime we're idle, we reach almost involuntarily for our phones. People speak of falling asleep looking at their phones in bed, only to be woken up by it dropping on their face. The CEO of Netflix was asked who his biggest competitor was. He didn't say Facebook, he didn't say Instagram. Sleep. He said that sleep was his #1 competitor. They want you to binge watch all night, only to wake up and it's Zohar time. If you really must watch, therefore, do it in moderation. I did an experiment. I asked some atfal, would you rather have a broken phone or a broken bone? I was shocked when some children said that they'd rather break their bone than their phone. This is the powerful grip that these devices have on us. The tech revolution has gone so far, in fact, it seems like playgrounds are empty. What happened to playing outside, to tree houses, to riding bicycles and exploring the natural world with mosquito bites and scraped knees? We used to get lost in the woods and in the creeks, finding our way home before Maghrib. But now neighborhoods are empty. Parents used to ground their kids from going outside if they wanted to punish them. Now it seems as if children relish to stay indoors to play Fortnite or whatever latest digital drug the video game industry releases. Parents used to play games like peekaboo and piggyback rides to keep their children entertained. Now they just hand them a screen. Don't let these machines take away those precious moments of bonding with your children. Parents say, every child has a phone. My child feels left out. They should also get a phone. What does it matter what other children do or what they have? Why not let your child be the good example for other children to follow? Is this not the purpose of our Jamaat after all? To be people who give good peer pressure on others rather than be affected by the negative peer pressure others have for us. Now, at some point, our children will have to use technology, so sharing tips is very important. Don't allow screens behind closed doors, whether cell phones or computers. Keep them in open areas where there's foot traffic. It used to be that we'd feel safe when our children were home because we knew that they weren't out where the evils were outside. But now those evils are inside, and they're behind closed doors, and your children are slipping in and out of DMs with the wrong people, with strangers, even though they're at home. Impose time limits and curfews. Some parents have a one charge per week rule. They give their child their device and it gets one charge and that's it. Next, you have to know what apps they've downloaded on their phones and set ground rules that you'll monitor them so there's some balance and accountability. Rather than leave them by themselves, you should watch programs or games with them. Those people who built these devices know about its negative effects that they have on children. Even they restricted their own children from having them. The biggest tech icons of our age, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, imposed strict age restrictions on their children having phones and limited their screen time. They promoted one standard for the world, but kept another for themselves. What standard will you keep? Khalifa Rabi rahimahullah once explained why he let his daughter watch television. Because when it first arrived in Rabba, it was controversial. He explained, however, that he'd prefer that she watch it in front of him rather than behind his back. Although he didn't care much for programs himself, he was at least able to monitor them, and over time, he guided her interests until she was able to grow out of it. My dear children, I too used to play video games. These games trick your brain into thinking it's accomplished something, into feeling satisfied, but you're actually just pushing buttons. There's nothing wrong with video games themselves, but you have to think about how much time you have. There's only so much time that you have after school, and it takes time to get good at anything, including getting good at a video game. So be careful what you want to get good at. And parents should remember, those parents who have shallow relationships with their children will ultimately drive to any place that fills that emotional void, including social media, in order to get the attention that they crave from you, but they're actually missing and not getting. My dear youth, these social media friendships are not true connections to people. There's no depth in it. People take selfies in exotic locations, but it's all a false projection of life. So there's no reason to get jealous of them, to feel left out, or start feeling depressed about your own life. These are just their highlight reels. They're hiding, in fact, their sadness. You're feeling inferior to something that isn't even real. No one takes selfies when they're yelling at their kids or at their parents. No one takes selfies when they're crying or confused. You're spending time you don't have sharing updates that don't matter with people that you don't even really like. They call this the woke generation, but this is what they're doing on the side. You're not woke, you're slept. This is laful ghazaf, boasting and bragging, vain chatter. Promised Messiah Islam knew the depth of people's natures and psyche and warned us that this is precisely the type of use of technology that we should avoid. Furthermore, temptations are everywhere online. One curious click can lead to another curious click very quickly. and this is very alarming. The largest consumers of online pornography are teenage boys aged 12 to 17. Save your children. About this temptation, the promised Messiah ﷺ said, if we place soft bread before a hungry dog, it would be vain to hope that the dog should pay no attention to it. Think of our precious sisters who are donning hijab and coats against the odds. If this is their jihad, then this is yours. My dear children, watching pornography is wrong because it makes you want and desire things that don't belong to you. It will rob you of your innocence and leave you in regret. It desensitizes your brain and leads you to physical weaknesses which can leave you in embarrassment on your wedding night. Allah is Al-Sattar, He is the concealer. He not only covers our faults from others, but if we begin to purify our eyes now, then all the negative effects of what we've seen will begin to fade from our system, and Allah will conceal our faults from even ourselves, including their negative effects. This way, you can truly appreciate the wholesome beauty that Allah has meant for us to enjoy in our loving wives. Popular also among youth are dating apps. Some people think that online dating and dating apps will find them a perfect match. But in reality, there is no perfect match. Because ultimately, marriage is not about finding perfect matches. It's not about finding the right person. It is about being the right person. This is why Islamic marriages and marriages arranged with the right intentions are better than dating. My dear brothers, swipe left, delete your dating apps. They'll take away your chastity, your self-esteem, and will leave you feeling empty. My dear parents, I don't know how else to tell you. Online dating, pornography, social media relationships with the wrong type of people, it's all happening, but it's hiding in plain sight. Man has discovered powerful technologies before, like knives and fire. You have to teach children how to use a knife before you put one in their hand. You don't simply leave children alone by fire, and this is what you're doing with social media and with phones. You let them play with fire and knives. They're getting cuts and burns all over themselves, but you can't see them. And if you could, it would break your heart. Some social media tips are very important because you cannot rely on your willpower alone. You have to take steps. Reduce the number of people you follow. Take the social media apps that you use off your front page of your screen and hide them away in a folder. Decide which platforms you'll stay on and which you will delete. Don't post anything that you'll regret, any message or any picture. It's natural to make mistakes, but it is not natural to expose your mistakes on social media. Not so long ago, a presidential candidate was threatening to start a U.S. Muslim registry. It was very humiliating for Muslims to have to do this, and it really hurt a lot of feelings and struck a chord. An American Khaddam, a Marine Corps veteran, logged into his Twitter account and launched a tweet. He took a picture of his military ID and tweeted the following message to that presidential candidate. He said, "I'm an American Muslim, and I already carry a special ID badge. Where's yours?" The tweet went viral. It was all over the national news. It started a chain reaction, and thousands of other people then started copying him. They joined his wave, tweeting a picture of their own ID. A random coworker of mine came up to me and said, "Did you see this tweet that started it all?" This is an example of what you can do with technology. He had no followers or social media experience, but his tweet, as they say, broke the internet. Hazur said that if you want to use social media, then you must use it for a purpose. Dhundo Khuda ko dil se. This Khaddam, in his own way, did exactly that. For alcohol, gambling, and nicotine, society poses age limits. We know these things release dopamine, and therefore there's this protection against exploiting our youth from being exposed to these ills. But we also know now that our phones also release dopamine, but there's no legal age limit by law for cell phones. So this responsibility lay in your lap. It's well known that some social media platforms sent engineers to Las Vegas casinos to borrow their principles with the goal to get you addicted. So they get you to scroll through your feed to constantly check how many retweets, how many likes, how many followers, what's my ratio, all to get you coming back hypnotically, like pulling the arm of a Las Vegas slot machine. This addictive behavior is what the promised Messiah Islam likened to performing circuits around an idol. But ke tawaf. The phonograph was not given to us for this purpose, he said. The Kaaba was intended for worship, but it too was once filled with statues. Don't turn stones into statues and iPhones into idols. I asked some youth if I could look at their phone to see what apps they had downloaded. Very few, if any, had MTA, or Quran app, or Qibla app, but plenty of Snapchat, YouTube, and music. We forget the early days of MTA and how difficult it was for our parents who went outside on a slanted roof trying to install a satellite dish, yelling to someone inside if they were getting any kind of picture. We did whatever it took to stabilize that dish once we caught the picture. Sometimes you would see MTA dishes with PVC pipe, duct tape, rope, whatever contraption it took necessary just to get that picture. And sometimes you wouldn't even get the picture, and you'd have to try again the next day, or a storm would blow through and you'd have to do it all over again. And all this just to get a glimpse of Hazur. And when we got it, we would be so happy. It would be like a thrill. This was Dhundo Khuda ko dil se. And MTA was so basic then, just a few hours. So how does it make me feel when here I am looking at your phones and not seeing an MTA app on your phone? MTA is the pinnacle of this technology age. You have the Khalifa everywhere you go, literally in your pocket, on demand, subtitled sermons, question and answer, you name it. A few years ago, Hazur told us not to get lost on Facebook. People were confused by the instructions, but now you see exactly what he was talking about and why. Mental illness, fake news, data hacking. So many public figures and celebrities are leaving it. There's a whole worldwide movement, delete Facebook. It's called #DeleteFacebook. But Hazur was warning us about this before it was cool, before it was trending. We've learned a valuable lesson here. Trust and obey Hazur, even if it doesn't make sense to you at first. My dear brothers, you were born for a great purpose and in a great time. The prophecy, I shall cause thy message to spread to the corners of the earth, is being fulfilled. Even after this, you will use technology to solve world problems like poverty, hunger, access to health and education. But never forget that while we have a powerful tool in our hands, it is not the phonograph or any of its modern-day descendants that is the ultimate source of our power. Our source of power is prayers, faith in Allah, ta'alluq billah, tawakkulillah, relationship with God and reliance on God. The Battle of Badr was won with wooden swords. The Quraysh had technology. They had metal swords, they had horses, they had camels. But the Awwaleen just had sticks which they carved into swords, and they won that battle. The Holy Quran that they had, it was not preserved in libraries or in digital format. It was Allah who safeguarded it in their hearts. Allah gave us spiritual victory before, and Allah will give us victory again. The Mujaddideen and Awliya were envious of you. They said, "Oh Allah, were we born too early? If only we could serve under the promised Messiah al-Islam." Hazrat Musa al-Islam, a prophet of God, wanted to be a part of this ummah. In our traditions, it is recorded that he had a conversation with God. He asked that if he could, rather than be raised as a prophet in his ummah, if he could rather instead be raised as a prophet in ours. And when God said no, he said, "Well, then can I reduce my status? I'll be raised as a Khalifa." And God said no, and then he finally said, "Can I just be raised as an ordinary follower of this ummah?" And God said no, that it is not ordained for you. And this was a prophet whose people were called the chosen people. And he wanted to be a part of this ummah. So what does that make you? What does it make us? We enjoy a status today that we do not truly recognize sometimes or appreciate. In the end, we call blessings upon the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his second manifestation in this time, the Promised Messiah al-Islam, who knew the power and danger of these devices, which become like false idols. Share your feelings, your status updates with God rather than strangers on social media. Over time, you'll prefer being liked by God rather than liked by random people. Use your phonographs of today to seek God with love, not for showcase and chatter. May we use technology for good and not for evil. May we bow to Allah Almighty alone and not to our screens. Wa akhiru dawana anil alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.